Greetings, everyone. Hello, 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 everybody out there in Facebook land. I'm Susan Bowerman, registered dietitian, and I'm coming to you from my kitchen in California, as I always do. And thank you. So happy that you're here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join me in my kitchen for another recipe. Always having fun cooking for you. And today's dish that we're making is something actually that I make pretty often because the ingredients that are in there are things that I often have on hand. Today we're making a vegetarian dish with beans and greens, plus we're putting a protein boost in there with some of our personalized protein powder. So we're calling this garlicky greens and beans. And so if you have canned beans in your cupboard, which are so convenient and a really good source of vegetarian protein, and you have some greens around and you have a few seasonings and some garlic, you can make this dish. You probably have what you need already in your house to make this tonight. But before we get to the recipe, don't forget that there's comments section, and I want you to go right now to the comments section. I want you to say hi. I want you to tell me where you are watching from, because I always like to give a few shout outs and say hi. I'm always just love to hear where you are because I have people watching from all over the world, which is lots of fun. So we are going to go to the recipe. I'm going to show you how to make these garlicky greens and beans, this vegetarian main dish. But remember too, in addition to telling me hi and telling me where you're watching from, we will have time after the video to answer some questions. So if you have any nutrition questions, it doesn't have to be about the recipe, it doesn't have to do with anything we're doing today, but if there's anything you want to know about nutrition, this is your time. It's your half hour with me. So put that in the comments section as well, because we'll definitely have time. All right, so if you're ready, without further ado, let's go to the video, but don't leave, because after the video, I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk to you about all the nutrition information in our garlicky greens and beans with a protein boost. Let's watch the video. This is one of those vegetarian dishes that I make at home a lot because it's quick and it's easy. It's really delicious. And it incorporates a few ingredients that you might not use every day. One being fennel, which is kind of an unusual but beautiful vegetable we're going to talk about. And the other green that I'm using today is this really pretty red Swiss chard. But I love this because, vegetarian meals sometimes can feel like they take a long time if you have to wait for beans to cook, although we're going to take advantage of canned beans today because they're so quick and easy. If you have a grain that you want to have on the side, you have to wait for your brown rice to cook or something. But this, I just consider this one to be a one-dish meal, which makes it really quick. So, and you'll see how fast it goes together. I've got my skillet heating up. If you were doing this on the stove, you'd want to put this at about medium heat, maybe medium high. And I'm going to start with 3 tablespoons of very neutral oil. I'm using safflower oil. You can use a sunflower oil, a canola oil. You can use a melted coconut if you want to, although I think that might be too strong a flavor. Or you can certainly use olive oil. If you want a little more flavor, you can do that as well. And what I'm going to put into this first, we're going to saute some vegetables first before we add the beans into it. So this is 1 small fennel bulb. I just showed it to you in a minute, and while it's cooking, I'm going to show you a little bit more about how to deal with a fennel bulb if you've never done it. But I've taken that fennel bulb and I've chopped it up really finely. You can see that. If you've never cooked with fennel, it's really delicious. It's got a very subtle but really nice licoricey flavor, but it's not sweet. But it really adds a nice flavor to this dish, I think. I'm also using a small onion, which I've diced up very small. So everything's we chop it up really small like that so that it cooks quickly. And then the other thing I'm putting in here, the Swiss chard, which I've got here, we're going to add the greens later, but I don't want to waste these stems because number 1, they're really pretty. And number 2, there's a lot of nutrition in those colorful stems. And sometimes we throw things away that we shouldn't, that there's a lot of parts to those veggies that we eat every day, like broccoli stems, for example. If you were doing this with broccoli, which you could, you'd want to do the same thing, is you don't want to waste those stems because there's a lot of nutrients in there. So if it's broccoli, for instance, you want to peel them and chop them up. But try not to throw those things away. We waste so much food that's so good for us. And so the stems on greens, to me, what's nice about it, it's almost like you get two vegetables in one, because you get two different textures, and you get this beautiful color that I got from chard as well. So I'm using about a full bunch of chard. If you buy that in the grocery store, it's going to have maybe 5 or 6 good-sized leaves, but this recipe is pretty forgiving. You can really add quite a few greens to this if you want to. All right, so we've got the fennel bulb, we've got the onion, and then we've got our chard. I'm also putting in 2 teaspoons of dried thyme. It's a nice combination with the fennel. Oh, and it's getting so aromatic already. What we want to do is we just want to let this cook for a few minutes until the onions, particularly the onions, start to get softened. So I'm going to put that aside for a minute because while it's cooking, I want to just talk to you a little bit about the fennel and also about the chard. So let me very carefully bring this over here. I've got this container of PPP because we're going to add a little protein boost to this dish when we're all finished, and that's going to be really nice too. Okay, so let's start with the fennel. The first thing is that when you buy this, you know, this is kind of a shame that this has to be wasted because this is a spectacular fennel, I have to say, that I got at the grocery store the other day. So the tops, generally, you know, some people might use some of these pieces, and you could use that, I suppose, in the recipe, but we're going to just focus on the bulb. But you can use these fronds if you want. You could even save some and use it kind of as garnish. It's definitely edible. But if you're going to prepare a fennel bulb, what you're going to do is you're going to cut off the bottom piece here, and then the other part you're just going to cut off. You want mostly the white part. And then this, you know, I've never tried it, but you could probably root this and you might be able to grow it. Somebody try that at home and let me know if that works. And I'm just going to continue to stir this, which is looking great. It's getting nice and soft. So when you cut your fennel bulb, what you might find is that some of these leaves, they kind of fall apart, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because sometimes you get a little bit of dirt in there. You can see that. So if I were putting this one in the recipe, I would probably want to maybe just run a little water on there and get out any dirt. And then if these pieces come apart, then to dice it, you're just going to start, you know, chopping these ones up and then chop them the other way to make that small dice that we did. And then just like that. And then for this piece here, the easiest way to do this is to cut it in half this way. So in other words, you've got 2 kind of white pieces. Then lay this down flat and then just cut it, you know, like you would cut an onion. Okay, and then you can just chop it that way. So that's how you deal with fennel. As I said, it's got this amazing, I just want to keep smelling it, this amazing licoricey flavor that I just absolutely love. But it doesn't mean that our final dish is going to taste like licorice. Trust me, it won't. All right, so that part, we've got our vegetables, they're going pretty well. I'm going to add a couple things, and then we're going to talk about the Swiss chard. So let me bring this back for a second. Because now what we can do, now that our veggies are soft, is we can start adding the green with a few more seasonings. So I'm adding, for seasoning, I'm going to put in 1/4 cup of red pepper flakes. This isn't super aggressive pepper, but if you don't like things spicy, you can leave that out. Or if you like more spicy, feel free to add a little bit more. And then the other thing I'm adding, I said these were garlicky, is I put in 5 really good size garlic cloves. I like this one pretty aggressively garlicky flavor. It's so delicious. You know, the beans kind of need it. You know, beans can be a little bit on the bland side. All right, so this just stirs for really a minute. You don't want to cook garlic too long because you don't want it to brown. So that's why you want to start adding other things to it pretty quickly. This is my leaves of my chard. All right, so I took my chard leaves. I'm going to show you in a minute how I did that, how I took them apart. I've just chopped them up really coarsely, and we're just going to add these a little bit at a time. And we're going to let them just wilt. It's just going to go really, really quickly. Chard is really one of my favorite vegetables. I always say it's kind of like grown-up spinach. It's It's got a little bit more texture than spinach, although it's not really tough, so it cooks really fast. It's got a lot of the same nutrients. It's got a lot of iron in it, for example, and it's got a lot of folate, which is a B vitamin that's really important for nerve function. But you can see it starts to wilt really quickly like spinach, but I love the red stems because it just adds a lot of color. All right, so this is looking pretty good, and these are going to continue, of course, to cook when we put everything else in them. It's smelling amazing. I'm getting the garlic. I'm getting a little bit of that scent of the fennel, and that thyme. If you love the thyme as I do, it's really, I'm getting that as well. All right, so now we're going to finish it off, and then while it's simmering, I'll show you how I dealt with the Swiss chard. All right, so the next thing that we put in is I've got 2 cans of white beans. I'm using something called cannellini beans. Those are white kidney beans. You can use any white bean. You can use any bean you want to. I chose these because they're mild in flavor, and I like them because they're a little bit bigger, so this is good. I'm also just going to put the liquid in there, and the reason I'm doing that is because, number one, we need a little moisture in here. Sorry, it's a little steamy. And because the liquid, what you're getting in there is you're getting the fiber. Hold on, let me stir this up. It'll be a little quieter. Okay. So that looks so pretty already. So the liquid that's in the beans, you've heard me talk about the 2 different kinds of fiber before, and I've told you that some fiber is what we call soluble, which means it dissolves in liquid. That's what's happening with the canned beans, and that's the reason that the liquid in the canned beans is kind of on the thick side, is because some of that fiber in there is what we call soluble. So why throw that away? I mean, if we have a recipe where we can use it, if you're ever making a soup or a chili that calls for beans, don't throw away that liquid because it's, you know, it's great. All right, so this is cooking nicely. Then we do need a little bit more liquid. I'm going to be cautious about how much I want. You can make this as soupy as you want to. I like this a little bit on the more like a stew side. So I've made some miso broth. You can use any kind of broth you want. I was trying to keep this vegetarian for you all. You can use chicken broth, and you can use a mushroom broth. For the miso broth, I just mixed up a kind of a rounded tablespoon of yellow miso and a cup of water, but I'm not going to add all of it. I'm going to put in maybe a third of a cup or a half a cup, and then we're going to see how much more we want depending on the texture we want. All right, so I'm going to put that in there for right now, and then the other thing I'm going to add is about more pepper, a half a teaspoon of black pepper. I told you I want this kind of aggressively flavored. All right, this is going to simmer just enough to thicken it. I think I'm going to put a little bit more liquid in here. And before I let it simmer for a few minutes, one way that you can kind of thicken this up and improve the texture a little bit is to take your potato masher or a heavy spoon and just start to mash some of the beans, not all of them. You want to keep some of them whole. But this just gives this dish this really nice kind of thick and almost a creamy texture, even though there's no cream in there. But it helps to kind of thicken up the juices a little bit. And while it simmers for a few minutes, it's also going to continue to thicken. And from my view, from what I can tell right now, I used about, looks like about 2/3 of my liquid. I may not add much more. We'll see. All right, let me move this out of the way for a minute, because I want to just talk to you about what I did with the Swiss chard, so you can see if you've never actually dealt with Swiss chard before. Let me show you what happens. So beautiful. I bought this red chard. Sometimes you'll find the rainbow chard, which is really nice. It's each of the stems is different colors, so there's an orange and a yellow and a white and a red. It's really pretty. So with chard, as you can see, it's got this giant leaf, and then it's got this big stem, or this kind of vein that goes down the back, and this is the part that's kind of hard and crispy. So what you want to do is just lay this flat on your cutting board and just take your knife and just start cutting on either side of this vein that runs along the back side like that, and just take that out. Then with the greens, what I like to do is lay them on top of each other. Maybe cut those in half one more time. When I say coarsely chop, I really mean it. And then just kind of stack them up and cut them into pieces, maybe 1.5 inches or 2 inches is fine. I mean, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to shred them. It's you know, that's pretty much it. So that's what you would do with the greens. And then with this part, this end that's kind of narrow, you can just cut that off. And then the piece that's left, since we were finely dicing that, why did we do that, by the way? We did it so that it would cook really quickly. So then just cut this into a couple of pieces that are pretty skinny like that. And then you can just start dicing that like you would your onion or whatever. All right, so you kind of get the idea. And that's basically all I did. But I wanted to show you in case you've never actually dealt with, you know, with fennel or with chard before, so you kind of knew what we were doing. All right, let's get this out of the way and bring our beans back into the picture. I told you this was really fast, and you remember, you're watching this in real time. It takes longer probably to prep the ingredients than it does to actually make this. This looks amazing. It smells great. As I said, from my view, I don't really want this any soupier. You could if you wanted to. You could add more liquid. It's really up to you if you want it more soupy. We'll see what happens when we add the remaining ingredients, because there's a few other things that we're going to stir in. So at this point, it's done. So I'm going to turn my heat off. One thing that I am going to add, this needs a little bit of acid, so I'm adding a tablespoon of lemon juice, and it just brightens up the dish a little bit, and it really makes it taste great. And then I'm going to stir in, this is where I'm going to stir in the PPP. So this is a pretty good protein dish because we've got those 2 cans of beans, and this is going to make several servings. But, you know, sometimes with vegetarian dishes, it's hard to get enough protein and to get more protein during the day. And this is one of those dishes where adding PPP works so well, because you can really, if you stir it in and it pretty much just disappears, and because it's not flavored, you can't really tell that it's there, but it's just going to add a little bit more. We just added 3 tablespoons, so we added another 15 grams of protein to our dish, which is great. It doesn't seem to have thickened it, at least from my view, you know, any more than what I would like. But as I said, if you want this more on the soupy side, feel free to put in a little bit more of your broth if you want to. And then the last thing I'm going to add, and then we will be done, is I've got about 1/4 cup of Parmesan cheese. And again, if you're trying to stay, if you're not doing dairy, for example, a really good good substitute that I think you've seen me use before is nutritional yeast. And nutritional yeast is, it's not the same as the yeast that you use to bake bread with. It's yeast that's really more designed to be nutritional. It's got a lot of B vitamins in it, for example. It's got some protein in it. And it makes a really good substitute for Parmesan cheese because it's got kind of that umami, cheesy flavor. This is done, and it's beautiful, you know, and we've got everything in here. We've got our vegetables, we've got our beans. And I think that to serve this, I've seen some people serve beans and greens with like crusty bread, which, you know, if you do that, go for it. It's delicious. And if you do that, by the way, if you are tempted to serve it more like almost like a soup, and you want to serve it with bread, then you might want to make it, add a little bit more of your broth and make it a little soupier. From my view, as I said, I like this a little bit more on the stewy side. I like it a little bit more, you know, a little thicker. And so I think that all this really needs on the side is just a nice green salad. And I think then you've got, it's pretty substantial. As I said, you've got your beans, you've got your veggies in there. And so to me, just having a little salad on the side is enough because it's pretty filling. I'm going to take a quick taste and tell you how delicious it is. I love this dish because the garlic isn't that strong. I get a little bit of kick from that pepper though, which I really like. The greens, what's nice about using Swiss chard in this recipe is that you could use spinach, but spinach cooks so quickly that, you know, we did that simmer for a little bit. And so when you do that, you know, the greens are going to cook down. If you use spinach, they might almost get overcooked, but these still have a little bit of crispiness to it. I mean, the greens are just, they're perfect. They're not overcooked. They're not undercooked. They're just right. But the beans, of course, give us a lot of texture. And then there's tons and tons of flavor from the thyme and from the lemon and the Parmesan. I know I'm getting that extra protein boost. You can adjust the salt and pepper levels on this if you want to. You notice I didn't add any extra salt because of what I did in the broth. So if you find like it needs a little bit more, you absolutely could do that. But I hope this is something you'll try. As I said, kind of unusual. I think the fennel's really critical to making this dish taste good. If you don't want to use chard, there's all kinds of other leafy greens that you could use. Some people will use collard greens or turnip greens, which will just take a little bit longer to cook, but equally delicious. All right. So hope you enjoyed that. Hope you try this at home. Don't go away because I'm going to be right back. I'm going to tell you all the nutritional benefits, give you the whole rundown on our garlicky greens and beans with a protein boost.